Hi everyone, welcome to part 2. Okay, Nikolic has just played bishop takes d4, which as we saw is the only sound way for him to continue. And Carlsen continued with knight takes c6. His knight's attacked twice anyway, and his deeper thinking behind this continuation will shortly become clear. He gives up his well-posted piece on e5, but the point is that thanks to the pressure on this bishop from the rook at a4, black is now forced to play knight takes c6 in order to defend the bishop. After which white is able to play the meddlesome move bishop a3, and this is one of the many ideas that Carlsen must have had in mind when he sacrificed the pawn. Of course, the black king is now trapped in the center, and the bishop on d4, which went pawn hunting, is a long way from being able to assist in resolving this problem. Personally, I would take white every time here and feel incredibly uncomfortable playing the black side, especially against Carlsen. To my mind, it is nothing less than insanity to willingly allow such a line simply to win a pawn. But that said, Nikolic is a genius grandmaster with plenty of his own ideas, and he knows a lot more about chess than me. He continued with the bishop e6, which is, a logical development for the bishop, defending the d5 pawn and relieving any potential e-file pressure. And rook e1 check was, looming, and he takes care of any threats that might create or any problems it might create before it's played. So Carlsen continued with knight f3, which gets one of his last remaining passive pieces into the game with tempo, attacking the bishop here on d4. And Nikolic answered with bishop b6. And Carlsen is able to create further pressure now with queen a1, attacking the g7 pawn. Interestingly, Carlsen is often compared to Karpov with his positional style, and out of sheer coincidence, there's a famous Karpov win against Kasparov where he has 4 of his pieces lined up on the A file like this. So it's an interesting coincidence then. Two great positional players should have very unusual but similar positions in the middle game. So Nikolic was now prepared to sacrifice a second pawn with queen c7, just allowing g7 to drop and enabling queenside castling, which perhaps had been his plan all along, with allowing bishop a3 and so on. He's got some nice defenders here. His king should be safe there. If g7 drops, he'll have the g file to work with, and so on. But winning the pawn, for black has allowed white to get a long way ahead in development, and this move, queen c7, is a blunder that definitely hands white the advantage. It was safe to play f6 instead and answer rook e1 with king f7, although it takes nerves of steel and white would have definite compensation for the pawn. Presumably Nikolic, with the intention to castle long, would have been more than happy with queen takes g7, as I said, opening the g file for his rooks, and most probably with tempo after a subsequent rook g8. However, at this point Carlsen made a curious move with b4, and there are many good points to this move. Black may well have been intending to castle long, and if so, this pawn advance makes sense in order to start disrupting the pieces and the pawns where black's king will be castled, especially if black were to play a6 at some point to help defense. And it also threatens b5, which is going to kick the knight, and with this knight on f3 in conjunction with the queen on a1, white is controlling e5, so there's not going to be any knight e5. So after b5 and a knight move, white can play knight e5 himself and, you know, reinstall a powerful knight on the e5 square. So this is an example of play on the flank influencing play in the center. However, there were many stronger moves than this b4 move, which Fritz now gives, you know, the position as slightly better for black, with very little compensation for the pawn now for white. And, you know, other moves that were possible were queen takes g7, which is the one that Fritz recommended, you know, accepting the return of the gambit pawn and restoring material equality. But, you know, this is standard materialistic engine thinking, and this line, of course, is one of the things that Nikolic was playing for, and it would take a lot of courage to open the g-file like this for the white side, you know, merely for the sake of getting the gambit pawn back. Why give black all of this play down the g-file? His king is going to be, you know, potentially under a lot of pressure there. Play might continue with castling long and say rook e1, now rook dg8, and, you know, there's definitely creative options for black here. Other moves that were good instead of queen takes g7 were rook e1, simply taking control of the e-file, in particular e5, and also rook d1, amongst other moves. After Carlsen's b4, Nikolic had the chance to protect g7, so that's what he chose to do with f6. And this also has the effect of controlling e5, which is one of the squares that white was playing to control as a strategy. And this square has been the key focus for the last few moves. And it was in fact possible to castle here instead. There's no danger in the b5 push here, apparently winning the exchange, because the rook is attacked by the bishop and the knight is also attacked. Because of course black can play knight e7, parrying both of those threats, but there's no doubt that white has some compensation for the pawn after rook e1, pinning the bishop because of the pressure from both the bishop on a3 and the rook on e1. So rook fe8 is practically forced. Now comes knight g5 with pressure on h7, and, you know, an awful lot of activity and threats coming, and, you know, excellent piece play in return for the pawn. All the white pieces are doing something. There's nothing concrete, but, you know, there's a lot of pressure, and there's one thing having nothing in concrete logical terms, but psychological pressure counts for a hell of a lot in chess, as Mikkel Tal showed us many years ago. So f6 is what Nikolic played. Okay, that's the end of part 2.